I left college with nothing but student debt and a stubborn belief that the answers weren't in the classroom. They were buried in the ground. People think failure comes like a wrecking ball, fast, loud, dramatic. Mine came quiet, like a damp towel left on the bathroom floor. Just sort of molded. I was 22 when I dropped out of UC Santa Cruz. Third-year architecture student, high GPA, zero idea why I gave a damn about any of it. I remember sitting in a lecture about postmodernist structural dialogues, with a migraine and a twitch in my left eyelid from too much caffeine. I looked around at the faces half asleep or buried in MacBooks and just thought, I don't want this life. So I stood up mid-lecture, walked out, and never went back. My dad stopped talking to me. My mom cried like I'd joined a cult. But I wasn't chasing some guru. I was chasing silence. Something real. Something that didn't smell like overpriced printer ink and future student loan debt. I rented a van off Craigslist, $700 cash, no questions asked, and drove east until the ocean turned to sagebrush and the air stopped smelling like ambition. I ended up in a nowhere town near Joshua Tree. Population, tumbleweeds. The kind of place where the diner coffee comes with cigarette ash and nobody asks where you're from because they already assume it's worse than here. I parked the van behind an abandoned barn and lived like that. Off the map, off the grid, off everything. It was in that barn that I met Miguel. He was in his 60s, leathery skin, thick accent, and hands that looked like they'd chiseled the planet into shape. Caught me squatting on his cousin's land and said, in the calmest voice I'd heard in years, if you're going to steal my shade, at least dig your own latrine. I stayed. Mostly because he didn't tell me to leave. Miguel was an oddball. Built his house out of mud and beer bottles. I mean that literally. Adobe walls, glass embedded like frozen fireflies. No AIC, no internet. But it stayed cool inside, even when the sun tried to murder us. I asked him how he did it. He handed me a shovel, and that's how it started. You ever try to build a house out of dirt? Not talking about backyard forts or YouTube hacks. I mean real earth architecture. Mix clay, sand, water, and straw into this sticky, ancient mess called cob. Then you stomp it, shape it, let it dry like it's bread for the gods. My first wall collapsed after 2 hours. My second wall stood for 3 days before a desert wind turned it into regret. Miguel laughed each time. Not mockingly. More like he respected the collapse. Said, a good wall teaches you something when it falls. I learned more from that mud than I did from 3 years of university. 3 months in, my hands were calloused. I'd stopped wearing shoes. My hair was a rat's nest, but I'd never felt more like myself. I built my first real structure. A sleeping nook with an arched roof made from salvaged rebar and earthen plaster. It didn't leak. It didn't wobble. It smelled like sun and sweat and old dreams. And people started showing up. At first, it was travelers, van lifers, burnouts, and idealists passing through. They'd see the curves of my mud hut from the road and pull over, eyes wide, phones out. Is this your art? No. It was survival, but I let them think what they wanted. One girl, Leah, stayed. Former finance intern, burnout case. Said her soul was allergic to cubicles. She started mixing cob with me. We built a fire pit, a communal kitchen, a garden. More folks came. Artists, runaways, ex-Marines. One guy brought his parrot. Another brought a broken guitar and a bag full of ayahuasca. We became a village of misfits, scraping beauty out of dirt and dumpstered wood. We called it Mudtown. Not poetic, but honest. That's when the reporters came. Some blogger from LA showed up with a drone and a DSLR. Wrote an article, Dirtbag Utopia, in the desert. Went viral. People called us a sustainable prototype for the post-capitalist collapse. Someone even said we were the American Mostar City. If Mostar had chickens and no plumbing. I didn't care about the buzz. Until the money showed up. Investors. Green Tech Brothers nonprofits waving checks like we were contestants on some humanitarian game show. But I knew what they really wanted. They wanted to own the idea. And me? I'd barely figured out who I was. So I ran again. Took Leah. Took Miguel. Took our notebooks full of sketches and mud formulas and drove north with nothing but a pickup and a promise. We were going to build something bigger. Something real. Not a commune. Not a business. A movement. One that started with a shovel and a question. What if the future was made of mud? We ended up in Oregon, near Ashland. Forest, rain, and a Craigslist ad for 8 acres of junk-covered farmland. $9,000 or best offer, BYO sept. It smelled like mold and foreclosure, and the only structure on it was a half-collapsed barn full of raccoon poop and rusted cans. We paid in cash, shook hands with a guy named Boone who smelled like old diesel and broken dreams. And just like that, we were landowners. I remember standing in the center of it, soaked from rain, looking at the wilderness around me and whispering, this is gonna kill me. Leah smiled like I'd just said I loved her. We started with tents, then built a cob shack, then another. The soil was too wet for proper adobe, so we experimented, added lime, sawdust, built drainage trenches that looked like wartime trenches. Miguel designed a rain catchment system using old barrels and a defunct kiddie pool we found in a junkyard. We named it Mudtown North, but it wasn't like the desert. This wasn't silence and solitude. This was weather, bears, zoning boards. Oh, the zoning board. That's when the trouble started. 3 months in, we got a letter from Jackson County. Immediate cease and desist of all unauthorized dwellings. Signed, sealed, bureaucratically soul-crushing. I drove to the office with a binder full of hand-sketched blueprints and a jug of kombucha as a peace offering. The clerk, her name was Angela, square glasses and a glare that could cut granite, barely looked at my pages. "This is not a permitted structure," she said, stabbing a photo of our dome-shaped cob hut. "It's zero carbon," I said, "built from local materials. Insulated, structurally sound. It's illegal, but it's beautiful." She stared at me like I'd just declared war on drywall. I left with a fine for $2,500 and a threat of demolition. We didn't pay. Couldn't. Instead, we got louder. Leah started an Instagram account, at @Mudrits_collect. She posted photos of barefoot volunteers building with earth, smiling kids painting murals on curved adobe walls, and me, mud-streaked and shirtless, standing in front of a wall, like a human Home Depot ad for revolution. It blew up. Comments poured in. "This is the future. Where can I learn? How do I join?" The zoning board sent another letter. This time, we sent them a video. Miguel explaining passive solar heating, while Leah narrated like it was an indie documentary. It got 600,000 views in a week. Then came the documentary crew. They were from San Francisco. All flannel, lenses, and startup buzzwords. "We love the narrative arc. College dropout goes feral, finds truth in the soil. It's marketable. Honest, grit with a purpose." I didn't know what any of that meant. They filmed for 5 days. Interviews, drone shots, time-lapse of us stacking cob like modern monks. The final cut was called Earth Blood, Reclaiming Home. Released it on YouTube. Over 2 million views in a month. That's when the money came back. But this time, it was smarter. Smaller checks. Quieter names. They weren't offering ownership. They wanted to invest. Scalable mud tech. They called it low-cost greenhousing. A venture firm out of Portland offered $150,000 to build 5 demo homes in underserved communities. I didn't trust it. Then I got a call from the mayor of Eugene. "We're looking to invest in greenhousing initiatives. What you're doing, it's disruptive in all the right ways." I was suspicious until she showed up in boots and rolled up her sleeves. Helped us finish a community of it. That night, as we shared fresh bread by firelight, she leaned in and said, "People don't trust concrete anymore. It's cold. It cracks. You're offering something primal. That's power." It stuck with me. Primal. I started to believe it. We used the grant money, eventually, built homes in low-income areas using local labor and workshops, paid volunteers, trained teenagers how to mix cob and read basic structural loads. No cranes. No synthetic anything. Just mud. And people. We called it the Ground Project. Every home we finished came with a small plaque, built from the earth, returned to the soul. Our name was whispered in city halls, at environmental conferences. I even got invited to speak at a TEDx event, where the same mud-stained jeans I built my first dome in. People applauded. And for the first time, I thought, maybe I didn't screw up walking out of that classroom. But success is a funny thing. It doesn't arrive. It creeps. And behind it comes the part no one warns you about. The copycats. The lawsuits. The betrayal. And all of it started with one signature. The paperwork looked harmless. A few pages, neat font, cream-colored letterhead. It arrived in a recycled envelope that smelled like eucalyptus and ambition. At the top, Sustainobuild Collective, LLC. They wanted a partner. They'd seen our work in Portland, watched the doc, studied our designs. They called me visionary. They called our work a prototype for the post-carbon century. It should have been a red flag. The language was too polished, too rehearsed. But I was tired. Tired of scraping by, of writing grant proposals at 3 a.m., of fixing solar panels with duct tape and prayer. So I signed just one paper. A partnership agreement. What I didn't know, the fine print had clause. We didn't find out until 2 months later, when Leah tried to publish our free online guide to cob building. The PDF got flagged, taken down by a copyright claim. Our own blueprints, ours, were now listed as proprietary assets of Sustainobuild Collective. I called the contact number from the contract. Some guy named Theo answered. Sounded like a podcast host who sold digital nomad courses on the side. "Hey, Jesse, my man. Yeah, saw the request come through. We're actually restructuring the IP portfolio. So we've paused all public release of the content, just for now." "Yeah." "It's not your content," I said. There was a pause. A short, dangerous one. "You signed off on shared asset rights," he said calmly. "We're protecting the brand, Jesse. Your movement has teeth now. Let's make sure it doesn't bite itself." I hung up. Then I threw the phone into a bucket of lime mix. It hissed like a dying snake. I tried to backtrack. Hired a local lawyer who worked for donations and fresh eggs. She wore overalls and quoted Thoreau too much. but she was sharp, told me I had a shot barely, that the contract was slippery but not bulletproof. I asked how much to fight it. She sighed. Ballpark? 30 grand. Maybe more. We had $2,411 in the fund, most of it earmarked for straw delivery. I walked outside and kicked the cob wall of our new meeting hall. It cracked. Not bad. Just enough. Enough to feel like a warning. Leah wanted to go public. Launch a full campaign. Name and shame, she said. Let the people who believed in us fight with us. But I wasn't sure anymore. People loved a grassroots underdog, until it turned into legal drama and licensing hell. They'd move on to the next shiny thing. Solar skateboards. Bamboo toilets. Whatever the algorithm wanted that week. Miguel said nothing for 2 days. Then, on the third morning, he knocked on my yurt door and said, "You need to see this." He printed out pages from Sustaino's new website. They were selling kits. Cobb Home Starter Bundles. $11,999. Includes premixed soil blend, straw, a proprietary shaping tool they called the Earth Wand, and access to virtual training taught by eco-architects. My face flushed, my ears burned, but the photo that hit me hardest was at the bottom. It was me, smiling, barefoot, arms outstretched in front of our first dome. From the documentary, used without permission. Beside it, built by our founder-level partner, Jesse Quinn. Partner, like I was one of them. That night, I walked out into the middle of the field where it had all begun. The land was soft from rain. The wind moved through the trees like it was searching for something. I stared up at the half-finished dome we'd started with our last workshop group. Volunteers had come from 5 states to learn. Their names were still carved into the drying wall. And I knew I couldn't fight them in court, but I could starve them, cut them off at the roots. Because what they didn't understand, what they never could, is that you can't trademark belief. You can't copyright community. So I packed my bag, grabbed the original blueprints, and drove south. I went rogue. No press, no lawyers. Just me, a duffel bag, and every hard drive I'd ever filled with notes, videos, failed projects, and dusty victories. I started a tour, hit small towns, gave free workshops, built ovens with retired librarians, shower stalls with ex-cons, left behind folders of information printed on scrap paper. No logos, no trademarks, just knowledge. Like seeds in the wind, Leah stayed behind to hold the fort. Miguel disappeared to remind some people in Arizona that walls can talk. I didn't ask what he meant. Miguel had his own language, half truth, half threat. By the end of the 3rd month, our work was spreading like moss. Cobb hubs sprang up in Colorado, Tennessee, even a churchyard in Detroit. No logos, no leaders, just hands in mud, making something honest. Sustaino tried to sue a group in Santa Fe. The story leaked, people revolted, and overnight, they became the enemy of the movement they tried to buy. That's when the call came from a woman named Denise Park. She ran a billion-dollar housing trust out of Seattle. Said her daughter had built a cob hut after watching our first video. It's the only place she sleeps through the night. She wanted to meet. I almost didn't go, but something in her voice, quiet, measured, told me this wasn't a pitch. It was a door. I met her in a rooftop greenhouse above a vegan bakery. She wore gardening gloves and smelled like rosemary. "I've read your story," she said. "I know what happened with Sustaino, and I'm not here to take anything. I'm here to offer you something nobody else can." "What's that?" "Scale, without strings." She opened a laptop. On the screen, blueprints. Dozens. Not just homes, villages. With shared gardens, gray water systems, cob schools, even amphitheaters. "This is what we want to build, if you'll lead it." I stared at the screen, then at her, then back again. My voice cracked when I spoke. "Only if we do it my way." She smiled. "I wouldn't have called if I wanted anything else." 2 years later, I stood on the edge of a field in rural Pennsylvania, barefoot, rain dripping from my beard, watching 27 strangers stack mud into the shape of a future. The air smelled like wet hay, wood smoke, and wet denim. A little girl was painting spirals into a cob wall while her dad mixed the next batch with an old shovel and a grin so wide it looked like it hurt. We had volunteers from 5 states, 3 local council members, a guy from Denmark, and 1 documentary crew who promised they weren't going to sell this to Netflix for clickbait. This was the 10th Mudroot site we'd built under the new initiative. We called it Rooted. 1 word, no suffix, no capital letters in our logo, just homes made of earth and hands. The structure going up behind me wasn't mine. None of them were anymore. That was the point. I taught, oversaw. But every village had its own voice. That's when Leah found me. She wore a raincoat 2 sizes too big and still somehow looked like the CEO of Hope. "Phone's buzzing," she said, lifting it like it might bite. "Who is it this time?" She shrugged. "Area code from DC. Could be government. Could be another startup trying to license your face again. I'm not interested." She smirked. "I know. But you should hear what they're offering." I didn't take the call. Not yet. Instead, I watched a teenager learn how to shape a corner arch out of mud. She was getting it wrong, but in the best way, carefully, curiously, determined. Miguel would have been proud. He wasn't with us anymore. It happened the winter before. A simple cough, then pneumonia, then silence. He didn't leave a will, didn't own anything to pass on, but he'd carved a line into the plaster wall of the first dome we built in Oregon, in shaky, chicken scratch handwriting. "If you want to change the world, Don't build a monument. Build a place where people remember how. We kept the wall intact. It became our motto. Every rooted village had that same phrase, carved into its community center. Not polished, not laser cut, just scratched into wet earth like a prayer. We started getting serious offers. One came from Japan. $6.2 million to design a sustainable village near Mount Aso. Another from a nonprofit in Brazil to consult on rainforest preservation shelters. Leah filtered the worst ones: eco-resorts, crypto-funded dome spas, the kind of projects that reeked of luxury guilt and greenwashing. But some were real. I picked 3, one in Kenya, one in Missouri, one in northern France. Each had its own rhythm, its own language, its own battles. But they all wanted the same thing: a return to something human. It wasn't all victories. We lost one of our California sites to fire. Not the kind that makes headlines. The kind that eats through bone and doesn't leave enough ash to mourn. Some said it was climate change. Some said arson. I didn't care which. It still took 6 homes and 1 life. A woman named Tasha who'd moved in with her 3 kids just a month before. I remembered her smile. It could have powered the grid. We held a memorial in the shell of her kitchen, rebuilt the walls, replanted her garden. Her oldest boy helped redig the gray-wadded trench with hands too small for the shovel. He didn't cry. I cried enough for both of us. That spring, the call came again. Same number. Leah was in the garden, elbows deep in compost, when I walked up and said, "Okay, let's hear what the Capitol wants." She smirked. "This should be good," I answered. The woman on the other end had a calm voice. Sharp, measured. "This is Natalie Reardon. I'm calling on behalf of the Department of Housing and Urban Development." I almost hung up right there. Then she said, "We've been watching Rooted. The scale, the survival rate of your structures, the low energy footprint. We believe this model could work at a national level." I stayed quiet. Then she said it. "We'd like to invite you to consult on a new federal housing initiative. Experimental, early phase, but with a budget exceeding 9 figures. Leah's eyes went wide. I stepped outside, away from the others, so I could breathe. The wind caught in the eaves of the mud structure beside me. I ran my hand along the plaster, warm from the sun, solid under my palm. "I don't want a paycheck," I said. "What do you want?" "Autonomy. No branding." And I picked the team. There was a long pause. "Agreed," she said. 3 months later, I stood on the steps of the Capitol, wearing a jacket I bought secondhand, boots streaked in red clay, and a look on my face that said I do not belong here. They called me a pioneer, an innovator, a visionary who turned the oldest material on Earth into the newest frontier in housing. I hated all of it, but I smiled, because I knew what they didn't. The power wasn't in the awards, or the checks, or the think pieces with headlines like "The Mud Messiah." Yes, that happened still haunts me. The power was in the dirt, in the people who shaped it, and in the truth I had dug out of failure and made into shelter. After the ceremony, I walked back to the hotel, took the stairs. Didn't like elevators. They moved too fast for people who spent their lives grounding things. When I opened the room door, I found an envelope taped to the mirror. No stamp, no return address. Inside, a note. "Don't forget who you were before they knew your name. Don't forget what your hands know. You still belong to the earth." At the bottom, a smudge of red dirt. Miguel, or someone who knew him. Or maybe just a reminder from whatever force out there likes to stir the mud every time we start to forget we're part of it. The government called it the Green Shelter Initiative. On paper, it was a revolution. A federal push to build eco-housing for low-income and climate-displaced families across 5 states. On camera, it was all smiles and ribbon cutting. Behind closed doors, it was a goddamn jungle. I sat in a room full of engineers who wore ties like nooses and used words like sustainability matrix and synergized net zero framing models. I tried to tell them that a house doesn't care about jargon. It cares about wind, weight, and whether the rain seeps through the corner seams. They nodded, took notes, then went back to proposing walls made from composite foam and bioengineered hemp bricks flown in from Germany. "Why not just use dirt?" I asked. They blinked like I'd said use garbage. I pointed to a map. "There's viable clay soil in every single proposed build site. What we need isn't funding for innovation. It's permission to go backward. We don't need labs. We need shovels." That didn't go over well. A week later, I was pulled aside in a break room by a guy named Will Carter, deputy director of something long and pointless. He had a Harvard ring, a crisp jawline, and a mouth that moved like it was always a few words ahead of the truth. "You're not playing the game, Jesse," he said, sipping a matcha latte. "These people need numbers, models, something that can be printed and pitched. I'm not selling a pitch. That's your mistake." Then he smiled like he was doing me a favor. "You're not in the mud anymore. You're in the machine." I walked out of that building and didn't go back for a month. Instead, I hit the road. Again, visited every site we'd helped build under Rooted, talked to every family, listened, took notes in a dirt-stained journal because screw their tablets and styluses. In a village near Reno, I met a man named Jorge who'd been living in his cob house for 10 months. He had no mortgage, a solar array built from scrap, and rain barrels lined in plastic tarp. He handed me a beer and said, "When the world ends, this place still stands." He wasn't wrong. We did 2 floods, 3 blizzards, and a small earthquake roll through our builds. None collapsed. One even got stronger, mud, it turns out, Likes pressure. That's when the call came. Leah again. But her voice wasn't calm. You need to get back to DC. Now. What happened? They're gutting it. The pilot program. Reallocating funds to prefab container homes. They've already sent out contracts. I didn't answer. I was staring at the sunset behind Jorge's dome, the curve of it catching the light like a half-buried sun. They're not even homes, she added. Just boxes. Insulated metal rectangles. Cheap, fast, sterile. Who signed off? Carter. He's spinning it as a cost-efficient pivot to modular resilience. I hated how slick that sounded. How much are they diverting? 82% of the budget. Silence. Then Leah said, softer, they want a press photo with you next week, standing in front of a prototype. I hung up. That night, I sat by a fire outside Jorge's dome, drank cheap beer, listened to the stars. And then I made a decision I'd been circling for months. No more playing nice. We leaked everything. Emails. Meeting notes. A video of a FEMA rep admitting that COB structures were too foreign-looking for political comfort. Leah dropped it anonymously to 3 major outlets. Within 48 hours, it was a wildfire. Eco-housing hijacked by bureaucracy. The Earth Builder turned whistleblower. I didn't hide. I went on camera. Unshaven. Raw. Furious. We were promised a future rooted in the earth. What we're getting is a shipping yard with plumbing. I went on national radio. Then a podcast. Then a live debate against Carter on a PBS panel where he called me a sentimental builder with no sense of scale. I said, scale without soul is just scaffolding for greed. That one trended for a week, but speaking out came with consequences. A week later, someone slashed the tires of our Oregon Hubs work truck. 2 volunteers were doxxed. The department froze our funding pending ethics review, but they couldn't freeze our movement because by then, it was too big. Independent builders were already replicating our designs in Guatemala, in Maine, in refugee camps near Athens. Teachers were using our blueprints in middle school science labs. A tech dropout in Colorado built an AI tool that used satellite imagery to suggest viable COB sites based on soil density and rainfall. It was wildfire, quiet and spreading. And the best part? None of it had my name on it. 3 months after the leak, I got a handwritten letter. No stamp, no return address, just my name, smudged in charcoal. Inside, a photo, a house, curved walls, open roof, painted by kids. Beneath it, in shaky block letters, we built this from your video. We're safe now. Thank you. It was signed by a group of names. One in crayon. I read it 5 times. Then I went outside, knelt in the dirt, and let the weight of it all hit me. That night, Leah found me standing barefoot in the middle of a half-built dome. The wind moved through the gaps in the wall like a song. She handed me a mug of coffee, sat beside me. You did it, she said. No, I said quietly. We did it. She smiled. Then, they're backing off. The agency, reinstating partial funding. Public pressures got them scared. And Carter's been reassigned. Where? Some think tank in Denver, studying resilience metrics. I laughed, loud, sharp, then went quiet again, because I knew this wasn't the end. It was just the part where the world realized dirt could fight back. When people talk about success, they think of upward motion, like it's some mountain you climb until you reach a peak with a perfect view. But the truth is, success is a circle. You come back to where you started, only now you're carrying tools. And scars. I came back to Joshua Tree 5 years after I walked away from school. Same sky, same dry wind, same stretch of dust and silence. The barn was still there, though it leaned a little more now, tired in the joints like it missed us. Miguel's dome still stood, half-sunken, sun-baked, a fossil of hope. I knelt beside it and pressed my palm to the wall. It was warm, like a memory, like a breath held between decades. Leah and I weren't together, not romantically. Never were, really, but she was still family. She'd stayed on the East Coast to run the Rooted Trust, now with 6 regional teams, each autonomous, each thriving. I'd step back, not to quit, just to listen. You reach a point where building becomes less about walls and more about why you build it all. I started writing, not blog posts, not manifestos, just stories. About people, about homes made of mud that didn't leak, about single moms who planted herbs in earth ovens and watched their sons stop having nightmares. About a man in West Virginia who built a 2-room dome with his bare hands and now hosts open mic nights inside it every Friday. He calls it the clay stage. I cried when I saw the pictures. That was when the university called. UC Santa Cruz. The dean, a new one, said she'd seen the documentary, followed the movement, and wanted to offer me an honorary degree, or at least an apology, she joked. I laughed. Then I said no, not out of bitterness, but because the dirt had taught me more than their books ever could. I spent that year visiting sites that didn't have websites. A patch of domes in Tijuana where a retired nurse named Rosa built emergency shelters for women leaving abusive homes. A circle of cob homes in New Orleans, built by teenagers who couldn't afford rent, but could carry buckets of wet clay like religion. A crumbling church in Lisbon someone turned into a classroom made entirely of earth and broken tiles. No fame, no hashtags, just hands, and heart, and patience. People who didn't wait for permission to start saving each other. But with every movement, there's a shadow. Ours came in the form of Ecolux, a company out of Austin that claimed to be inspired by the mud revolution. They weren't. They were parasites. Their version of a Cobb home had LED light strips, marble countertops, and cost $850,000 a unit. They trademarked the term earth domes and filed cease and desist against actual builders. The worst part? Some people bought it because packaging always sells better than purpose. I was furious. Then I got a message from a builder in New Mexico, handwritten, scanned and emailed like an act of defiance. Inside was a note. They're trying to sell us the ground we already stand on. But don't worry, the dirt remembers who shaped it. And I realized Ecolux couldn't stop us. They were noise. We were roots. By year 7, Rooted had expanded globally. No headquarters. No CEO. Just a blueprint that passed from hand to hand, often on wrinkled paper, sometimes sketched on walls in charcoal. I stopped traveling so much. Moved to northern Arizona, built a dome with my own hands. Again, no help this time, just to remember how. I kept it small. One room, a desk, a stove, a bed, a window facing the sunrise. People sent letters. One was from a girl in Jakarta who built her village's first composting toilet using our guide. She signed it from one mud lover to another. Another was from a prison in Montana. Inmate number 33287. I read about your domes. When I get out, I want to build one for my daughter. I wrote back, told him to reach out when he did. A year later, he did. His name was Darnell. His daughter helped mix the mud. They built 2 domes, side by side, one for her, one for him. He called them second chances. The movement was never about me. That's what made it work. I wasn't a leader. I was a shovel someone else picked up. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind howled through the creosote and the fire died low, I'd think about that first lecture at UCSC, the one I walked out of. I didn't leave because I was lost. I left because I was found. The world just hadn't caught up yet. One morning, I woke up to the sound of someone knocking. Not urgent, just steady. I opened the door. A kid stood there, 17, maybe. Long hair, hoodie, big boots, and the look of someone who hadn't found home yet. You Jesse Quinn? I nodded. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his backpack. It's from my mom. She said if I ever didn't know where else to go, you'd know what to do. I took the note. It was old, crinkled, but the handwriting was familiar. Elena. A name I hadn't heard in years. I remembered her. A girl who'd stayed for 2 days in Mudtown, helped build one wall, then left, said she wasn't ready to stop running. Guess she did. I let the kid in, made coffee, gave him a tour, handed him a shovel. He smiled, started digging, and just like that, the circle grew again. There are moments that don't feel like moments at all, until you look back and realize everything changed in them. Like that morning I stood on the roof of our newest community dome in Arkansas, watching a girl teach her younger brother how to make plaster from straw, clay, and spit. She was maybe 9, her hair in a messy bun, her voice serious. No, you gotta listen to it, dummy. Good Cobb squelches, not slops. That's it. That was the moment I knew we'd won. Because it was normal. Because no one was watching for likes, or tagging brands, or asking for credit. They were just doing it, passing the knowledge down like a recipe, like a language. Like survival, and all I'd done was plant the first seed. I never got rich the way they said I would. Sure, money came, grants, donations. Once, an anonymous gift of $500,000 wired through an offshore account with a note that read, "This is repayment for what I took. Use it better." We never traced it, didn't want to. We used it to build a tool library, a permaculture school, and fund 100 small builds in flood zones. But I never owned a house, never bought a new car. Never got into crypto or spoke at Davos or got a blue check. I wore the same boots for 6 years. Owned 2 shirts. And I've never felt more full. People kept calling me the father of the green building movement. It made me cringe every time. I wasn't a father. If anything, I was the dirt beneath the fingernails of the people who were. The single mom in Ohio who built a Cobb duplex and now teaches at the local high school. The refugee in Jordan who took one workshop online and used it to build shelters for 20 families in the desert. The retired contractor in Michigan who started building domes for cancer patients who couldn't afford hospice. They were the real architects of this thing. Me? I was just the dropout who decided failure was a foundation. I got older, not old, but older. You feel it differently when your body's been in a fistfight with the earth for 2 decades. Joints stiffen, skin goes rough. Your back stops warning you. It just tells you. And grief changes. I lost Miguel, then my mom, then a boy we trained in Louisiana who died in a car crash before his dome was finished. I flew down, finished it for him, carved his name into the lintel above the door. Sometimes I think grief is just love that doesn't know where to go. So it turns into sweat and labor and the soft curve of a wall that catches morning light. When the documentary sequel came out, Earth Blood, 10 years later, they asked me what I'd say to my younger self. The one sitting in that architecture lecture hall, restless and angry and raw. I didn't hesitate. I looked right at the camera and said, "You're not quitting. You're starting." That clip went viral again, but I didn't care, because by then, I was already somewhere else. A few months ago, I got a letter, real paper, handwritten, from a girl named Eliza in British Columbia. She'd built a greenhouse using our guides. Said it was the first thing she'd ever built. Said she wanted to be an architect, but couldn't afford school. Then she found our forum. She closed the letter with, "I don't know if I'm doing it right, but when I build, I feel like I'm part of something that matters. Thank you." I wrote her back, told her there's no right way, just the way you can. One night, I woke up in my dome, rain tapping the roof like a soft drumline. I walked outside. The world smelled like ash and sage. The air was thick with silence. And in that quiet, I realized something. I didn't want to be remembered, not the way names get etched in granite or printed in textbooks. I wanted the work to survive me, the walls, the gardens, the people who built with their hands, barefoot and grinning, knowing that even the smallest dome could hold 1,000 stories. So if you're reading this, and maybe you are, maybe this story's been passed to you by a friend, a stranger, a dusty old hard drive. Here's what I want you to know. You don't need permission to start over. You don't need blueprints to begin. All you need is earth, water, straw, and time. Because the earth remembers. Not your name, not your titles, but the weight of your hands, the heat of your breath, the way you bent down and asked the dirt, what can we build together? And then did it. And if I'm lucky, maybe someone, somewhere, is reading this. Inside a home made of mud, warm, safe, humming with life. And maybe they look up at the wall, see the curve, and say, yeah, someone loved this in a shape. That's enough for me. That's everything.